It's been a very busy NHL news day, especially thanks to the Erik Karlsson blockbuster trade. In this video, we're going to look at the spin-off effect from that deal. What else will we see from the Penguins? The Montreal Canadiens especially just unloaded some players, but certainly created more questions than answers, in my opinion. Plus, we're going to look at the Sharks and how this impacts them as well. The goalie market suddenly looks a little bit different for trades. Lots of goalies that could be moved, and we'll discuss how that could play out. Plus, we also finally have a signing in a new home for Matt Dumba. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a very busy and very interesting news day today. Certainly the Erik Karlsson blockbuster trade. I'm sure most of you have heard about this by now. This is not exactly new. This went down fairly early in the day, around lunchtime. The Erik Karlsson blockbuster deal that's been rumored for some time has finally taken place, and we're going to mainly look at the spin-off effect of that and how it affects all the teams that were involved in that today. But before we jump into the news, I do want to acknowledge some other unfortunate sad news from the world of hockey. Longtime NHL goaltender and former All-Star Gilbert has sadly passed away at the age of 74. Of course, Gilbert played for the North Stars when they were originally the Minnesota North Stars, the Boston Bruins, which is where probably most people will remember him from. Also played for a bit in Detroit. So longtime goaltender, was an All-Star. Certainly a well-known player during his time. So certainly want to pass on our condolences to the friends and family of Gilbert. Certainly hate to see this kind of sad news, but it does happen from time to time, especially when you get older players like Gilbert. But certainly 74, based on today's standards, not super old by any means. So certainly sad news that we wanted to pass along there. As I mentioned, we finally have a signing in a new home for Matt Dumba for the upcoming 23-24 season. Certainly one of the bigger names that were still remaining out there in limbo in the UFA market since July 1, who had not signed. Of course, Dumba, who had played his entire career up until this point, at least with the Minnesota Wild, has signed a one-year contract with the Arizona Coyotes with a $3.9 million average annual value. So certainly the Coyotes were a team that's been rumored and in the mix for Dumba for a number of weeks now. We heard that there was a few other teams that were kind of showing interest, and that it was probably going to take the Erik Karlsson trade to take place before Dumba was going to sign. I do think there was a chance that depending on how things went with that deal, that he may end up in San Jose, but that was not to be. He goes to Arizona, who's suddenly looking a lot better. I mean, I know some people are saying that maybe Arizona challenges for playoffs this year. I don't know if I'd go that far with it. I mean, they're going to have a young team for sure, and they're certainly going to have an interesting team, a lot of skill and lots of youth and energy. They've added some veterans in the mix that can certainly guide those guys along and certainly be leaders and help this team be more competitive. They're definitely going to be better than last year. I will say that much for sure right now. Once we get into my season previews, I'll analyze them a little bit closer compared to other teams in their division and the conference and see where things go. I don't know that they can be good enough to get into a playoff spot, but they're certainly going to be more fun to watch. They're certainly going to be more competitive. And like I said, they've added some good amount of NHL experience along with some interesting prospects like Logan Cooley. So Dumba's going to go and help out with that. And a lot of the guys they added are all one-year deals. So, Arizona's going to have a lot of flexibility. Maybe some of those guys that went there this year, maybe they move on to other teams and try to, be in a more competitive situation again, hopefully trying to win a cup, or maybe they like it in return. Who knows? I mean, we're still waiting on a lot of clarity as well around the arena situation in Arizona for the Coyotes. We haven't really heard a whole lot. Right after the Arizona deal first went belly up, it wasn't going to happen. And we did hear a few other scenarios that, right after in the first week, but it's been quiet since. And I know by the time the season started, the NHL was really looking for some clarity. The players are looking for clarity, and we'll have to see. Like many people said that by the halfway point of the season coming up, if there's nothing in place concrete, that might be like your cutoff, that the NHL might have to cut bait and really really look at relocation for next year, but we'll have to see. That's a topic for another day. But Dumba certainly makes them better, along with lots of the other veterans that have joined them here today. Now, as I mentioned, the Erik Karlsson trade went down finally today. That's been something we've been talking about and been long rumored for some time. He ends up in Pittsburgh, which is the team that we talked about the most in the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, where he was expected to go. There was a few other teams that were serious and had made inquiries, but not to the point that Kyle Dubas is. Mike Greer, the GM of the Sharks, admitted that Kyle Dubas was extremely aggressive and has been really for, he said, a couple of months. So to me, that's probably from the time he got there. Kind of set his sights on Karlsson as being his, his target. I know in the deal earlier when we first talked about when the trade first broke, obviously we discussed the trade and broke it down and analyzed it a little bit, but certainly you can look at it a little bit more now. The other thing that's really interesting for some people, I know I was looking after Pittsburgh, actually put a post on their social media. It's 65 days till the season. So, number 65 gets traded 65 days out. That's kind of interesting. And really, Elliot Friedman had mentioned 3 or 4 days ago to keep an eye out for Sunday. And that's when it went down. It went down on Sunday. Of course, we didn't even end up getting a buyout, which is what most people thought was going to take place, because most people thought that Dubas would not be able to trade both Granlund and Petry, that one of them would be bought out, but he pulled it off. So just to quickly recap that, just kind of, so we can go, as the main premise I want to look at for the trade rumor for today is looking at the spin-off effects and what this deal does for those teams, more specifically Montreal and San Jose. Pittsburgh could still do other things, but I don't expect a lot out of them. But the Penguins in this day for this 3-team trade, they shed the contracts of Mikael Granlund, Jeff Petry. They had to retain 25% of Petry, but that's the only retention they did. So Granlund, Petry, Casey DeSmith goes, and they lose 2 picks. There's a first and a second. And then in return, they pick up Erik Karlsson. They get Rem Pitlick from Montreal, a prospect, and a 3rd-round pick. So they get 1 pick back. They lose 2. The pick's not as high as the other 2, so that's to be expected. But they shed, basically, I would say going into today, they had about 4 bad contracts. Granlund, Petry, DeSmith, and Carter. And Carter's the only one left now. And Carter doesn't have any trade protection, so maybe the Penguins aren't done. We'll have to wait and see. But Dubas, by picking up Karlsson, also gets Rem Pitlick, and really at the end of the day only gives up really a 1st-rounder, like of substance. Granlund, Petry, DeSmith are all contracts they wanted to move anyway. So Dubas, I think, really did a wonderful job. He didn't overpay. Now, San Jose, they move Karlsson. They also move a prospect and a 3rd-rounder. They, in return, between the 2 teams, they get Mikael Granlund, Mike Hoffman, defenseman Jan Rutta, and a 1st-rounder. So, they don't have to retain a whole lot of money. Now, they retain $1.5 million per year on Erik Karlsson, which is a lot less than most people thought they would end up doing. But at the end of the day, the Sharks get 3 veteran players that the other teams didn't want and a 1st-rounder. So not only did the price change drastically, this is a sad return for San Jose. I mean, I know it's a different regime here with Doug Wilson acquiring Karlsson, but look at what they gave up to get Karlsson. Ottawa's set now for years to come because of that trade. Now, it didn't look good at the time because it was all picks and prospects, but they ended up getting Josh Norris, who's their number 1 or number 2 center, depending on the day and how things line up. We'll call him a number 2 center for today. They got the draft pick that got them Timmy Stützle, who's their top center. So, they got their 2 top 6 centers out of this deal, and they got other pieces, too. I mean, they had a couple of years out of Chris Tierney, some time out of Dylan DeMello. They got some things back when those guys moved on. I believe they ended up getting the draft pick that led to them to getting Mads Søgaard as well, I think it was. They've got a lot out of that deal. So, San Jose gave up a ton to get Karlsson. They had him obviously there for 4 or 5 years. Didn't have a ton of success. I mean, he personally had a couple of good years, especially last year. The team didn't have a ton of success, though. And then now they hardly get anything back when he goes. I mean, they do get the cap flexibility because they're only retaining 1.5. So they get 10 out of $11 million gone, right? Short term, a lot of that money is going to be eaten up by these other veterans that come in. Granlund's got multiple years on his deal. Hoffman's only got one. I believe Ruda's got one as well. So, ultimately, short term, they're going to get a lot of flexibility long term, but it's not a great return. Montreal, in the meantime, they move a couple of forwards and a group that needs to be cut down. They lose Hoffman and Pitlick. Pitlick was a decent player. I think they wouldn't have mind keeping, but I think at the same time, he had an up and down year last year. It was very much open to a fresh start. He should be able to play more consistently in San Jose. Hoffman goes, somebody who they've been wanting to move on from. So that creates a little bit more flexibility in the forward group. So for their younger players, which is good. They get Jeff Petry back with 25% retained. So that knocks his cap hit down to like 4.6, which is better. They get Casey DeSmith and Nathan Legare. So, ultimately, they move players that they didn't want, and they get players back that have value. Now, they may not keep Petry, which we're going to talk about, but still, at the end of the day here, Kent Hughes of Montreal did really well as well. Not as good as Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh wins this trade hands down, but I think both Pittsburgh and Montreal walk away from this doing way better than the Sharks. Now, whoever gets the best player, usually what's what you say, who wins the deal. So obviously the Penguins get Karlsson, so it's hard to say that they don't win, but Montreal wins and does well here too. And it's hard to imagine they do better than the Sharks, but they do. Normally when you see a third team involved, it's because of retaining extra money, and that wasn't the case this time. Worked out to be quite a bit different here. So now what does this mean for the Sharks, the Penguins, and the Habs? And the Penguins, they've done a lot now. I'm not sure we're going to see a whole lot more out of them. They could tinker still, but obviously, they move most of what they wanted to move on from, which was good. So Dubas gets rid of a lot of those contracts that he wasn't fond of. He's already picked up Riley Smith for the forward group. Obviously, he gets Karlsson for the back end. Goaltending's a little bit more clear now. I don't know that they do a ton more. Maybe they bring in one more player, possibly. I don't think they need to do much on the back end. I think maybe, if anything, they either maybe make a small trade and bring in another depth forward, or maybe they look at, because they could handle with their cap, they could probably squeeze in another player that's available in free agency. Maybe Thomas Tatar, I don't know. Only the problem is they have room, but it's not going to be for the whole season. The only reason they have room is because of Jake Gensel being hurt and being on LTIR, so they could add through that. Otherwise, they could stand pat and just be cap compliant, and they could even get out of LTIR easy enough just by demoting one player, which is certainly capable of doing. So that way they can actually accrue cap space for the deadline. So we'll see. But at the end of the day, this creates more questions for San Jose and Montreal. Like in San Jose, will they now go back to the Vancouver Canucks and look at that Tyler Myers trade? Now, because obviously they do, you could say, have a need for a right shot defenseman. Tyler Myers, of course, as we mentioned before, has its signing bonus that's due in the middle of September. So if they do that, it probably wouldn't happen till then. And ultimately, once that signing bonus is paid, he's only going to be owed $1 million in actual cash salary. So to take Tyler Myers for the final year of his deal and only pay him $1 million, and he can play second or third pair for you, that's not bad. And now the rumored was LeBanc for Myers. So really, now the problem too is in Vancouver. They'd probably love to move Myers. I still think that's a possible deal. We could see reevaluate it, but they don't really have the room in their forward group for LeBanc right now, unless we see other moves out of Vancouver to shed some money. So that's kind of like, a possibility. Otherwise, maybe it's just Myers to San Jose, and that's it. I don't know. Maybe Vancouver retains a little bit and moves them. We'll have to see, because the Sharks do have some space that they could add. If Vancouver retains some money, they could probably add him without moving something out. But hard to say exactly if that'll go back to it. But that's another deal that we could see in Montreal. Obviously, there's a lot of talk now. Are they going to keep Jeff Petry, or are they going to flip him? As the belief here from, I know Eric Engels of Sportsnet, who covers the Habs, was on Twitter earlier stating that he feels it's pretty likely that they're going to try to flip him. And if they can't work out a deal, then maybe he stays. I know him and his wife were anxious to get out of Montreal before. I think a lot of that had to do with the COVID restrictions, though. Now that that's over, maybe they'll have a different take. But again, I still don't think anybody left there on bad terms or anything. It was nothing personal. And, I think Kent Hughes and Marty St. Louis would welcome him back on the roster if need be, but they still have too many defensemen, though, in my opinion. So I don't know that their intentions to keep him. If they do have to keep him to start the year, they could trade him later on. For example, though, like they could now retain half of his remaining salary and knock it down to like around $2.4 million. So, he's got a modified no trade, but you get all of a sudden a right shot defenseman who has a lot of history of being a good puck mover and good offensively for that kind of price, and wouldn't necessarily need to give up a whole lot to get him. Maybe he could be flipped. So I don't know that Montreal keeps Jeff Petry, at least not for very long. So I don't know that he starts the year in Montreal, and we'll see. If he does, then I'd say he'll be traded partway through. Now, the other interesting part here is the goalies, because they also picked up Casey DeSmith. Now, I found that intriguing because they already have Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault, as well as Caden Primo. Now, Caden Primo, I don't know if they still consider him the goalie of the future. At this point, I think that might be Montembeault now. I mean, Montembeault is older than Primo, but not drastically. He's still young enough that he could be the goalie of the future. He could be the goalie of the present and the future at this point. Jake Allen is 32, has 2 years left on his contract at $3.85. Didn't have a great season last year, but I don't know if you can put it all on him. Montembeault's numbers were a little better, but it just seemed like the team might have played a little better in front of him at times. But I don't know that, Jake really had a terrible year or really regressed or anything like that. We'll see how things play out. But now to go into training camp with 3 NHL goalies, with Allen, DeSmith, and Montembeault, all with a, got not only NHL goalies, but like, decent amount of experience now. And then to have Primo, who needs waivers now. That's 4 goaltenders. I mean, I don't think they are opposed to carrying 3 on the roster if they need to. Get through training camp, see if they have any injuries. Obviously I think that's something they're comfortable with because they do have the Carey Price LTIR contract. They can be cap compliant with 3 goalies. It's not ideal for any of the goalies though, because they're not going to play enough to really get good rhythm going. That's the problem. Somebody's going to be either missing all the time or they're going to rotate them, and no matter how you shake it, it's not great. So I do wonder about that, and I would suspect if they're going to trade somebody, you would think Jake Allen's the most likely. He's the oldest. He got 2 years on his deal, $3.85. Montembeault's got 1 year, $1 million. DeSmith's got 1 year at 1.8. And then you've got Primo as well, so I'm making under $1 million. So I don't know how that's all going to shake out, but we could see Montreal trade Petry, we could see Montreal trade Jake, and they still have forwards that could go like an Armia, for example. So I don't think Montreal is done. But the problem here with the goalie trade in Montreal is, like, look at the goalie market now. Like, now we have rumors out of Montreal, or not, like suggestion that we could see a goalie go. Because I mean that was as soon as this trade went down, like Montreal media was like, okay, they're probably not keeping Petry. They might move a goalie. They're probably comfortable with 3, but now they've got 4. So, but look at the goalie market. Like, there's a supply-demand issue here. You've got some higher-level goalies, all-star guys like Connor Hellebuyck on the market. He still hasn't been moved. You got John Gibson in Anaheim, who's been wanting out for like a year. He's not moved. You got Calgary, who might have to carry 3 goalies, but would prefer to trade Danny Vladar. He hasn't moved. You've got... the Flyers have a glutton of goalies too. Like, I don't know how things are going to go there. I mean, we have Carter Hart, Cal Peterson, Felix Sandstrom, Sammy Urson, and they might have Fedotov coming over from Russia if the IIHF rules in their favor and says that his contract's valid. That's 5 goalies. Now, I can see them putting Sandstrom and Peterson in the minors. I don't think they'd be afraid to have them on waivers if to go down. So, Hart, Urson, Fedotov, I mean, I could see a Carter Hart trade coming together down the road. I think they'll want to wait till this World Junior investigation is, if that ever gets announced. We're still waiting on that. But you have extra goalies there. You don't know what's going on in Vegas. We haven't heard much about Robin Lehner. If he can't play, then there's no issue, and I don't think Vegas would be in the market. But they have Aiden Hill, Logan Thompson, and then, of course, Lehner as well. So, if Lehner's healthy, they have a goalie problem, going to move somebody. If he's not healthy, then they don't have a problem. They'll go with Hill and Thompson, as expected. Then you look at the teams that might be in the market for goalie, there's not a ton. I mean, Tampa has Vasilevsky, and right now their backup would be Jonas Johansson. I can see them having interest in some of these guys, but at the same time, they don't have much in the way of money to make it work. LA right now has Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley. I would suspect LA has with the team in front of them on the D and the forward group, have a great chance of being a playoff team. Are they comfortable going into a potential playoff series with Talbot and Copley as your goaltending tandem? I don't know that they would be. Maybe they upgrade later on towards the end of the year. I'm not sure, but I would think that LA would be a prime team to look at one of the bigger names, whether it be Hellebuck, Gibson, or one of those guys. I know Buffalo has been rumored to maybe be in the mix, but I don't think they have to do anything. I think they're content to go with like Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devin Levi. They still have Comrie too. The Blackhawks might take a goaltender. They have right now their duo would be Mrazek and Arvid Soderblom. I don't know if they'd want to upgrade there, bring in another goaltender bump Soderblom down. I don't know if that's something they would consider. But there's just not a lot of teams out there where there's like an obvious goaltending need. There's a couple. And there's also a few UFA goalies out there, too, that could satisfy some of their needs, too. So as much as you look at the Habs and say, geez, we're probably going to see a goalie trade. They've got 4 NHL goaltenders now, 3 of which got experience, and the other guy, even though he doesn't have a ton of experience, needs waivers, so they don't want to lose him. But where are they going to go? It's going to be complicated. But Ken Hughes has been quite resourceful so far, and I think, like I said, he answered a few questions today. Same with San Jose, but I think there's created a few more questions. So will we see Tyler Myers move now? Will Jeff Petry move again? Will the Habs trade Jake Allen or another goaltender? I think a lot of these questions will have to remain to be seen, but I think the trade market hopefully is going to be a little bit more able to move now that we've got a big blockbuster deal. I think a lot of things, especially in the D market, were held up waiting for this to go down. So hopefully that'll kind of create some more activity. So that's all for tonight. Let me know your thoughts on everything down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.